Hello, BookTube. There is a heat advisory in effect for Boston and the surrounding areas. I think it goes until 7 o'clock tonight. No idea why that is. It's going to be in the mid-90s today, Fahrenheit. The mid-90s on Saturday, the mid-90s on Sunday, and the mid-90s are higher on Monday. So why the heat advisory isn't going straight through the long length of the weekend, I don't know. But once upon a time, for many, 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 many years, I would have said heat advisory, Schmeat advisory. Keep in mind, these were years in which if I was back home in Boston or wherever, from parts abroad, from Namibia, where it gets to be 217 degrees during the day, I would have thought nothing of what an American city could do for heat, which is ridiculous because heat kills a lot of people every year in the United States, and that's before the climate started to change and heat started to become legitimately deadly. It had been a while since I went to the Brattle Bookshop, and the last time I was there with a guest, which is always a pleasant experience, but a different experience than going by myself. So I wanted to go, but the idea I had in my mind is that I don't say heat advisory, Schmeat advisory anymore. I'm old. I'm a frail, querulous shut-in. So I thought, well, the Brattle sells used books, and you don't need any more books. So you can wait until the weather evens out, until the weather is presentable, until the weather is slightly less vicious. It's going to be boiling hot, mid-90s Fahrenheit for the next 4 days. Then, it looks like, accompanied by maybe some rain, the temperatures are going to drop down a lot and stay there for a while, for a week, solid. That would be great. It'd be absolutely great to get the cool of the morning back. It's absolutely not here now. I go out at, this morning it was 5:15, and it was hot. It wasn't just warm, it was hot at 5:15. The sun wasn't even over the ridge, and it was still hot. But TLDR, long story short, I went anyway. I went out anyway. I went to the Brattle Bookshop anyway, even though there was a heat advisory. And it was pretty hot, even first thing. I had a couple of other things I wanted to do. It wasn't just the Brattle, so I went. And that's bad enough. But I also got 100 pounds of books and lugged them back here. And keep in mind, it was hot when I got to the Brattle. It was much hotter when I came away from the Brattle to make my way back here. Much hotter. I have been resisting putting car apps on my phone, like Lyft or Uber. I had those apps on my phone, and then I got rid of them, obviously, during the pandemic, because even once the stay-at-home orders are lifted, you're still closed up in a car with someone whose hygiene you cannot account for. Masks only do so much. So I just got rid of them. I deleted them off my phone, even though they were pretty convenient for me since I don't drive. But I am now I'm strongly considering putting them back. Let's just say, once I was done chatting with everybody at the shop and looking at all the books, and was lugging them out onto the sidewalk in the blaring sunlight. If you had asked me then, hey, can I have $15 to get you back to your house in an air-conditioned car, I'd have instantly said yes. So, anyway, I found a ton of books. A pile of books. A great whopping pile of books. And I left behind a pile of books no less big. I could easily have doubled this. If I'd had a car or a teenage weightlifter beast of burden, I would have doubled this amount. And I had a great time. It was warm. It was humid. But I had a great time. There were a lot of old friends at the Brattle this morning. Not people, but books. The books. There were a lot of old friends among the books. I don't know why that was. That isn't always true. Actually, in a theoretical sense, I do know why that was. Probably someone with the exact same similar taste in books to me died, and their relatives sold their books to the Brattle. Probably that's why it was. But anyway, we'll start off with the little paperbacks, and God, we could go on forever and ever here. We'll start with trash, is what we'll start with, because it is Garb August. It is the second day of Garb August. Criminali's great booktube event in which we all read garbage in the month of August. So I found a movie adaptation, which are, despite what some of their steadfast defenders claim, almost synonymous with garbage. They almost can't help but be. Because whoever's writing the novelization didn't make the material and has no ability to change it. And almost no time to add to it or elaborate on it, since these things usually have a brutal turnaround time. So you ordinarily, I only like a movie adaptation when it's done by an author I like. Vonda McIntyre, for instance, did a few movie adaptations of Star Trek movies that I quite like. And there have been a few others. Alan Dean Foster has done a bunch of movie adaptations. He's a good writer, so I tend to like his movie adaptations. The two big questions for me about movie adaptations is what happens to a movie adaptation of a bad book, of a bad movie. So a book made out of a bad script. And also, can a writer that you really like turn that around? And I found a book today that is going to answer, at least partially, those questions for me. I found a movie adaptation that I want to read by an author I really like, of a movie that was really, really poorly written, that I've never read before. The Wolfman. I don't know how many of you remember this movie with Anthony Hopkins from, what was this, 2011? Something like that? I don't remember when The Wolfman came out. I had high hopes for it. I shouldn't have, because it stank. It was absolutely horrible. Just horrible. The scenes that were meant to be terrifying were instead queasily sexist or sensual in a weird, warped way. The special effects were terrible. The climax at the end was predictable and boring. It's just a terrible, terrible thing. But this was written by Jonathan Mayberry, who's an author I really, really like. So I will give it a try. For Garb August, it will go on the pile. Then I found this book. This is for another ongoing BookTube event, The Summer of Sport, which was created by Mark at Booktime with Elvis before he abandoned not only his own event, but all of BookTube, in which we read sports-related literature for the whole of the summer. I've been neglectful of Summer of Sport, but I am one of the co-hosts, so I mean to do more videos this August. And this one I'm going to read, this is also going on the pile for tonight. This is Tom Boswell's book, How Life Imitates the World Series, which I read once upon a time. This came out, I think, in the late 80s. When did this come out? Late 80s? Oh, no, the early 80s, 1982. He was forever, he was an absolutely legendary sports columnist for the Washington Post. And here he is writing about his favorite sport. And he had an unbelievable ability, not only to draw poetry out of a boring inning, but also to get great quotes out of guys that speak maybe 10 words in a year. And I remember liking this book. I read it soon after it first came out, but that's a long time ago. And so I found it for $1. I will gladly read it again. Then a piece of fiction, also from Penguin. This is Talkative Man by N.K. Marion. This is a Malgudi novel. It's a tiny little thing, take no time at all to do. It's really a short story. But it takes place in his fictional Indian town of Malgudi. That I wish I had all of these books. I have no idea even how many these green-spined penguins. I have no idea how much Narayan they even printed. I have quite a few, but I know there are more. I've never seen this one before, so I grabbed it. Probably it will go on the pile for tonight as well. Narayan is a perpetual joy. The Malgudi books are like the Map and Lucia books. They are like the Jeeves and Wooster books. They're evergreen. They just stay great the whole time. But I also found a bunch of literary critical stuff in paperback. Someone had a vast collection of these things, and I can't imagine they gave up that collection voluntarily, so they must have died. But a lot of these things, you'd be foolish to wait and hunt around for a more durable hardcover. You'll never find it. I have hopes for one of them, but in the meantime, a tiny little trade paperback like this is going to survive perfectly. It doesn't have the weight to destroy itself. So I found one that I just love. This is Louis Bredvold. This is his book from, when did this come out? 1966? No, 1934. This paperback is from 1966. This is The Intellectual Milieu of John Dryden. Tiny little thing. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I have a lot of trade paperbacks like this that are heavily annotated. They have been many, many times reread, many times used, and they hold up just fine because they don't have enough weight to tear themselves apart. And this is it's weird. It's not a full-dress John Dryden biography, obviously, since it's 100 pages long. Instead, it's more of the world in which he thought and wrote and had his being. It's, in many ways, a lot more convincing to me than a full-dress biography would be. Dryden he lived not only by his pen, but in his pen a lot of the time. An incredibly hard-working writer who loved it, who also loved it, loved the experience of it, loved the feeling of producing, of creating. I love this book. I had a copy of it eons ago, this paperback eons ago. No idea what happened to it. But I wasn't surprised to find it, because whoever got rid of these obviously was all the same person. Like, for instance, I found also another great critical study. This is George Williamson. I would have taken anything by him, but this is his most successful book, The Senicamble, all about the changing way we write prose in the last 400 years. It's full of notes and annotations. Just, I love it. It's a classic thing. This was there. There were a whole bunch of other classic studies there, classic literary studies, but literary studies like these two things, rather than what is now formal literary criticism, which is completely insider baseball. It's entirely its own argot. It is not comprehensible in the least to the outside reader, no matter how steeped the outside reader is in the subject that it's purportedly about. The literary criticism, if any, is being written of John Dryden today. I would not understand a single sentence of it, and I wouldn't want to, because the sentences would be convoluted and boring. This was done back when literary studies could be popular. This was, the Well-Wrought Urn by Kenneth Brooks, the Road to Xanadu about Coleridge. You got popular studies like this, and people bought them and read them. I had a copy of the Senicamble once upon a time. No idea what happened to it. These were all familiar to me. Also, another literary study. This is from a series of books from Duckworth. I've shown you a few of them. I have Propertius and Tibullus and Catullus and also Horace. They did a series of books of short book-length profiles and studies of ancient authors. And I found C.M. Bauer's book on Homer, which is pretty amazing. And this is in fine shape. It's a little bit whopped. I think probably it was in the sun or in the water or something like that. Maybe somebody took this, some kindred spirit might have taken this to the beach. But this is, obviously, it's not a biography. It's a literary study, but it's so good. Every book in this series is so good. And I don't have them all. I wish I did. But I looked. When I saw this at the Brattle, I was thinking, okay, this person, whoever it is that had the Senicamble and the intellectual milieu of John Dryden and this, whoever it was, they would have had all of these. They would have had all of these Duckworth books about ancient writers. And so I looked, and I didn't see any others out in the sale lot. I don't know if there were any in the store. I didn't go upstairs. The last thing I was going to do was go upstairs when it's 150 million degrees. But Homer and I are old buddies. We are old friends, and so is Bauer. He's a terrific writer, so glad to have it. Then another trade paperback. This is also obviously from the same person, and it is probably, you could call it a literary study, but it's also a biography, and it's the only one of these. The rest of these are going to hold up fine to reading and reading to annotating. This next one is the only one I got that I wish I could find in hardcover, because it is great. It's John Middleton Murray. First of all, who's a writer that I absolutely love. I never find anything by him used. I don't know if that's because his star has completely fallen and no one remembers who he is anymore. Probably that is it. Or it could be that the people who have his stuff just don't want to give it up because it's so rereadable. He wrote a ton of my own profession, of deadline literary book reviews. I'd be willing to bet that no one has even tried to collect all of those things. You would have to go everywhere to find all of his work like that and put it in a gigantic book. I guarantee you the sale of that book would repay the effort, because he was a terrific book reviewer. But I found his literary critical biography of Jonathan Swift in a trade paperback. Now, this is bigger than the others. Here's where you get to the point where, the weight of the book could... These other books, all these other trade paperbacks are just this wide. So there really isn't much that can happen to them. This thing, I just wanted it. I want to reread it. It's broken. It will break more as I reread it. But I never see this. Not as a trade paperback, and certainly not as a hardcover. I grabbed it. It was $1, so I don't feel I'm not beating myself up too much. And then another literary study here. I've had this thing many, many times. I love it, even though I think it's wrong on every point. And I think now it's proven wrong, because this came out in 1984. Yeah, this has been proven wrong in the 40 years that have elapsed since then. This is 2-Bit Culture by Kenneth Davis, the paperbacking of America. And it's Chicken Little. It's doom and gloom about what the gigantic fad of paperbacks did to American literature. I mainly like it because it's all over the place with it's incredibly wide-ranging with Davis's knowledge of and study of paperback books. So I love it anyway, just even as nothing more than a title accruer, but it's also interesting. His thoughts on the book culture are very interesting, especially since he starts off the book with kind of a potted history of popular publishing in America, he's terrific as a writer, so I'm happy to have this. I've had it before, but I'm happy to have it again. Then what else have we got here? Oh God, we're only halfway done. Okay, well this next one is by Eva Clark, and it is Hidden Allusions in Shakespeare's Plays. No dust jacket, great big thing with a bookmark that is Deanna Troi. It's a next generation bookmark of Deanna Troi, and this this is a find. Really, might be the find of the day. This is from the 1930s. Is that right? 1931. Yes. Is that right? Here, hang on. I'll find out. Yeah, 1931. And the author was much taken with a book that came out a few years before this by J. Thomas Looney, positing and putting forward his theory that the person who wrote the plays of Shakespeare was not William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, but Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. And Eva Clark was much taken with that book and decided to do some research of her own on the subject. She was convinced by Looney's book. It's pretty hard not to be. You read his book. I know that people love to make fun of his last name, but his book is pretty convincing. You might be predisposed to say, no, it's all nonsense. But his arguments are done in good faith, I think, mostly. She read that book and was taken by it and decided to do a whole bunch of research on her own. And she thought that Looney's central idea that Oxford was Shakespeare is correct. And if that idea is correct, then you have a major problem. Apart from anything else, you have a major problem, which is that Edward de Vere dies too soon for the standard dating of Shakespeare's plays. It would mean that 20 or 30 plays, that he would have been dead when 20 plays were written and produced. Oxfordians, the people who put forward this theory, have known that this was a problem all along, and there are two ways to solve it. Two major ways to solve it. One is to say that Oxford didn't die when we know that he did. And the other, which is the route that Eva Clark takes, is to say that the standard dating of the plays is wrong. She notes in this book that Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, was childhood playmates with the Earl of Sussex, who went on to become the Lord Chamberlain of Queen Elizabeth, and the Lord Chamberlain of the Lord Chamberlain's Company, a famous playwriting company associated with Shakespeare. So she had the idea, well, okay, if we take as our starting assumption that the dating of the Shakespeare plays is wrong, and admitted you're taking that assumption for ahistorical reasons. You're trying to assume that because you think that a theory about different authorship is correct. So you're starting with that. You're starting with a guess. But if that's true, she thought, then if I go into the records and I study the plays that the Lord Chamberlain's men produced at the time when Oxford was flourishing, rather than look at Shakespeare's plays, half of which occurred after Oxford was dead. If I do that, what will I find? What plays were they putting on the stage? And paying for, and having someone write, whose authorship is not known. And she, if I remember correctly in this book, it's going to be a joy to read this again. It's going to be a joy to. If I remember correctly, she comes up with an unbelievably suggestive list of the plays that she found in the record. She's not making it up. plays in the records that Lord Chamberlain's men produced, I don't know, in the 1550s, late 1560s, that have different titles, but they're the exact same play. They're the exact same subjects as Shakespeare's plays. Right down the line. Like 20, she found like 20 or 30 of them that don't have authorship. We don't have the plays themselves, but the titles in the records of the Lord Chamberlain's men sure are suggestive. What are the odds that the Lord Chamberlain's men would, when Shakespeare was a little boy, or when he was just marrying, that the Lord Chamberlain's men would be producing a play about Coriolanus, a play about Two Gentlemen Verona, a version of Hamlet? What would be the odds that they would do that one after another, unless something funny is going on there? Her idea of something funny, I'm going to reread the book to find out, and I'm going to have Deanna Troy along with me. But her idea of the something funny is that the Earl of Oxford was writing those poems for his old friend, the Earl of Sussex. That he was writing those plays. And that somehow or other, down the line, bordering on the next generation, all of those plays were retitled and repackaged by other people under the name Shakespeare. I don't remember, it's been a long time since I read this book, I don't remember if Eva Clark is okay with maybe the idea that William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon did those rewritings. Maybe she is. Maybe she's okay with that. Maybe she's not ruling him out of authorship just in general, but it doesn't matter, because to find a Shakespeare authorship controversy book, especially one that's old, that didn't know that there would still be books written about this in 100 years, that's a joy. That's an absolute joy. Okay, then these next three, I had World War II on the brain at the Brattle this morning. So I got a bunch of books I got 3 books on World War II. They're all rebuys. They're all things that I have read. In two cases, I've read them many times and know them quite well, but I got them anyway. The first is by Peter Elstob. This is his book, Hitler's Last Offensive. I have this as an old Corgi UK mass market paperback, and I have it. It's right out in the kitchen. It's still intact. It's still in usable condition, but it's not really... I don't trust that paperback to live through a reread at all. I was happy to find it, but I don't trust it to live through a reread. Whereas this trade is, you can't tell on camera, but this is rock solid. And it's Pen and Sword Publishing. I don't really object to the cover. The cover of the Corgi paperback is just Hitler's face. This is about the Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler thought he could make one last stab to get to some river, to get to gasoline depots. He and his generals correctly guessed that the Allied forces ringing him in to his own west would be a little complacent. They would assume that the Wehrmacht was done, and that if he timed it right and gave no advance warning whatsoever, he would be able to roll up those forces to a good extent. Now, that was true. That ended up being true. German forces just walked up to Allied defenses that weren't paying any attention, weren't waiting for them at all, and had some minor successes. They had some minor successes. It was doomed. It was never had the slightest chance of working. But nevertheless, it did work for a bit, and it makes for gripping reading. Elstob's book is fantastic, but this is something I can put on the shelf and actually take off and reread and annotate, which is great. And then the other two that I got, gigantic hardcovers, I wasn't thinking. What was I thinking? I should have been thinking about the fact that I was going to carry 100 pounds back here in 95-degree heat. But I wasn't thinking. Or maybe some atavistic part of me was thinking heat wave, schmeat wave. But anyway, I got 2 gigantic, well-known books on World War II and World War II related things. The first one is William Manchester, The Arms of Krupp. This is his book about Krupp, the Krupp arms dealer and munitions manufacturers. The family going back forever and ever. He takes the story way back, centuries back. But the bulk of the book is about World War II, and here you have this great, creepy cover. That is not our author. You have this great, creepy cover. Our author here, I think this book has him as a young man. Yeah, there he is, as an argumentative young man. This is just terrific. I'm a big fan of William Manchester anyway, but this is just terrific to read. I just recently reread it. It was one of the books recently that David Murphy got. Well, not recently, months ago. He got a big hardcover copy of this. And I reread it and wrote about it for Steve Reads before I sent it to him, before I sent it back to him. But then sending it back to him was a little bit on the painful side because I realized I don't have a copy. So I grabbed a copy, even though it's a big hardcover. I got it anyway. A little bit of a twinge. Same thing with Hitler's Last Offensive. Hitler's Last Offensive I already have. And I have it as a cute UK mass market. But the print type is too small in the mass market, and the mass market won't survive. Same thing with The Arms of Krupp. About 25 years ago, The Arms of Krupp was reissued in a beautiful floppy trade paperback, just gorgeous. And I had that for a long time. I don't actually know what happened to that. And ever since when I've seen The Arms of Krupp at a used bookstore or a charity shop, I've thought, well, don't get it because you're waiting for the trade paperback. You want that trade paperback. I've never seen the trade paperback since. I doubt that I ever will again. So why not have a hardcover for a few ounces more? The same thing with this next one. This next one I've had and read and loved in a mass market paperback. Big brick of a mass market paperback. But not only are those not comfortable for me to read anymore, but I never see it. And also it would fall apart. So another author that I like is William Shire, and this is his book, The Collapse of the Third Republic. Another big, thick World War II volume. These two monstrosities. Good Lord. Another big, thick volume. This is about the fall of France. And it's great. It's just fantastic. And for the longest time, I had this in a succession of mass market paperbacks. Little, fat, white mass market paperbacks that I loved. I read it and I came to know the book in that format. But I never see that format anymore, and I wouldn't be comfortable to read anymore. Or there'd be no room at all, no ability whatsoever to annotate it. And I might want to annotate this, especially since in between the last time that I read this book and now, I've done a huge amount of reading on Charles de Gaulle. So I might want to do a lot more annotating. So I have the hardcover. It's no big deal. These are both classics. Actually, all three of them are. They're classics of World War II related literature. So I got them. I'm going to try not to complain about it to myself. Then I found a biography. There were a few biographies there today that I wanted, but biographies are heavy. I found one biography that I have on and off had. I love it. I never managed to hold on to it. One way or another, I get rid of it. But I found it again, big hardcover, another heavy hardcover. This is Maynard Mack's standard biography of Alexander Pope. Another great, big, heavy hardcover that just added to my bent back on the way back here. But this is great, not only because Maynard Mack does an absolutely thorough job of narrating Pope's life and times, his broader milieu, but also because rare in a biography like this, Maynard Mack is really good at Pope's poetry. Really good at it. And not just the humor and the inside jokes and the clever punning, but also the beauty of it. The actual scansion of it. He's really good at that. That is rare. You don't often find that in a writer of literary biography, so I grabbed it. Always room for a literary biography. Then this next one is a rebuy. I have a copy of this, but it's falling apart. I go back to it quite often. This is Alexander Cockburn. This is his book, Corruptions of Empire. A collection of his pieces about, obviously, as you can tell, the 1980s. There are quite a few books out in the sale lot today about the 1980s and about Ronald Reagan. Quite a few. This has not only that, this is a collection of all kinds of pieces that he did, including literary pieces that are really, really good. I think there is a collection of Cockburn that is only literary stuff, but I've never seen it. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I could swear that there was. But it doesn't matter because I love reading his political stuff. I have to say most of the political stuff in here probably would sail right by someone who was born in the 21st century. A lot of these pieces were written in the white heat of current events and were not rewritten. So I don't know how enjoyable those parts would be for a total newcomer to the subject of the Reagan years. But if you aren't, this is really enjoyable. I wish I could offer it as a double. I wish I could say, since I have this one, you can have my old copy. But my old copy is ready for the compost heap. And of course, you've got all these '80s figures there. A lot of these will not be familiar to you if you're very young. And the figure in the background, the picture in the background, is not just the White House burning. it's Alexander Cockburn's ancestor who did, in fact, burn the White House. It's rather bratish, but I was happy to find this for $1 to retire my old volume. And then the last thing that we'll get here, Hannah at Hannah's Books will see this coming. None of the rest of you will. Was by far the heaviest thing. It's 3 times as heavy as the heaviest book that I have, and it's a paperback. God knows what it was like as a hardcover. Look at this thing. This is from Oxford University Press, and it is the complete works of Thomas Middleton. Look at the size of this thing. It's gigantic. Oh my God. This is a lectern book, definitely. This is not comfortable enough to read, but this is going to have it has an enormous introduction and a gigantic amount of notes on everything that we have that Middleton wrote, which includes a lot of stuff, including some really, really strong plays. Some of his plays are really, really good. You ought to see if... It's unlikely, but you ought to see if you can get a chance to see one of them perform. The Changeling is a really good play. It's really enjoyable. He wrote a lot in life that wasn't all that long. It was average for his time period, but I'm older now than he was when he died. I wonder, there was an all-star stage performance of The Changeling years and years and years ago. I know that Bob Hoskins was in it. I think Hugh Grant was in it as well. I wonder if that's on YouTube. So you get a taste of what it would be like. But anyway, I spotted this thing when I was at the Brattle with Hannah, and I already was loaded down with 1 million pounds of books, so I put it on hold. And I grabbed it today, impulsively, without realizing that I was also once again saddled with 1 million pounds of books, and this was just going to add to it. So this is a big mail haul in a lot of ways. It was immensely heavy to bring back here. So now I have shifted firmly back into heat wave, schmeat wave, and I'm not getting out of that until the weather changes. I am not getting out of this until the weather changes. Yep, that's clear. So it'll give plenty of you time to send credit to the Brattle, since I'm pretty sure that all the credit now is gone. But anyway, that's what we found today. The collected works of Thomas Middleton in the definitive word on Thomas Middleton here. Just the volume to have. Fantastic. A replacement copy, nice clean replacement copy of The Corruptions of Empire. A beautiful new copy of Alexander Pope by Maynard Mack. Some World War II classics. Collapse of the Third Republic. The Arms of Krupp and Hitler's Last Offensive. I found a big book on the Shakespearean authorship controversy in which the author is not trying to convince you. She's not trying to convince you. She's operating from the assumption that the Earl of Oxford wrote the plays of Shakespeare. And in this, all she's doing is digging in to try to substantiate that. If I wanted to substantiate that, how would I do it? Well, I would have to change the dating of the plays. Somehow, I would have to change the dating of the plays. She's not actually changing the dating of when Titus Andronicus appeared. All she's doing is saying that the Lord Chamberlain's men were producing and showing to packed houses a play about Titus Andronicus 30 years before. That's all she's doing, is proving that that is the case. And how likely is it that one after another of Lord Chamberlain plays would correspond with the subject matter and presentation of Shakespeare plays? But anyway, I'm gonna greatly look forward to rereading this. Then a bunch of paperbacks. 2-Bit Culture, John Middleton Murray's book on Jonathan Swift. If ever was reviewing here, that is just wonderful. Bauer's book on Homer. Looked around, didn't see any of the other books in this Duckworth series, and I didn't see any other Bowery, which would be great. That'd be great to find more of him. I could, the better. The Senicamble, The Intellectual Milieu of John Dryden, Talkative Man by N.K. Narayan, a Malgudi book. How Life Imitates the World series by Tom Boswell, a guaranteed good reading. And for trash, for Garb August, The Wolfman by Jonathan Mayberry. So he's writing a movie adaptation, an adaptation of a crappy movie, but he's an author I really like. So what's going to happen there? Am I going to enjoy the book? I'll report back. Anyway, that was a Brattle haul for an ill-advised trip. And that's not going to happen again, not only this week, but this summer. I am sufficiently chastised by the ordeal of getting back here so that I'm not going to put myself through it again. I'm going to wait. Next week, the temperatures are going to be beautiful. I'm going to wait until then at the least. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.